Well, hey everyone, George here from Church Clarity. I wanted to shoot this video to share a little bit more about this 500-year Reformation anniversary campaign that we're doing. We've asked you to print off these posters that we've made that say, "Is clarity reasonable?" at the top, and then followed by a series of questions that we have that we're posing to the church. They also have a blank space on them where you can write in your own question, a question that you're posing to sort of the church at large, or perhaps a local church that you have a specific question for. And the idea basically is that you would tape these to the front door of a church near to you, any church, doesn't matter what church. Clarity is reasonable regardless of the church. And we're asking you to snap a photo of that and send it to us so that we can collect 500 just because it's the 500-year anniversary. And it looks like we're getting closer and closer to that goal. But I wanted to share a little bit more with you as to the why. What's the significance of this campaign? Because I don't want it to just be sort of a one and done, like cute little marketing thing that we did and there's posters everywhere and it doesn't really mean anything if we don't unpack the significance of what we're trying to do here. So a couple things. One, anytime, and we know this, especially if we're a part of the church, we write something down or we sign our name to something, or it cements it further in sort of our own psyche, and we own it more. This idea of commitment and consistency, that when I commit to something, that I'm going to follow that up. I'm going to be consistent in my behavior towards it. And so one of the practices that we are trying to cultivate as a part of Church Clarity is this idea that clarity is reasonable. And that's pretty like common sense. It's more or less a rhetorical question, but it's also a question that we should actually be asking, right? So the idea behind this campaign is not just to tape a poster to the door of a church, but it's to change our collective posture towards the church, that we should be people of inquiry, that we should wonder very basic questions. Since we started, the response to Church Clarity has been overwhelming. We've had almost 1,000 churches submitted to be scored in our database. We've published about 200 of those. We have a team of volunteers working all hours to basically make sure that the method that we're using is one that's consistent, and that we can get as many up there as quickly as we can. But what's been interesting is that there hasn't been any valid pushback to the question of, is clarity reasonable? I think most people, if they're cornered, would answer that question with, yeah, clarity is reasonable. And the language is important because we are trying to change the way that we're having these conversations. We're trying to highlight the fact that the people of the church are actually empowered to ask very basic questions of their pastors. And the stories that we're hearing are they're unbelievable. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens if we as a people who sort of are rallying behind this idea of clarity that seems to have resonated. We seem to have struck a chord together. So imagine what happens when people, just like you, make the simple move of being more curious. If we start paying attention to how churches and how pastors are responding to the simple ask for clarity. It's weird, right? When they're quiet, when they ignore, when they act like it's not happening. I still don't really understand it, but I do know that the people collectively have more power than the systems and the structures that enforce policies. So this is my ask, that you would consider this campaign to be more than just a one-time act, but that you would really start weighing the question of, is clarity reasonable? Because the longer I think about it, the more stories I hear, the more it seems like it's a really, really simple idea that just might have the power to not only reform the church, because we know how Reformation sometimes leads to unintended consequences, but actually dismantle the oppressive parts of the church, the ones that we've carried with us, the ones that cause us to scratch our head when 81% of people who identify as evangelical, for instance, voted for a president who is basically destroying not just national norms, but global norms. And it's why, sort of, when you even hear me mix politics and religion, you cringe a little bit, like, ooh, is he allowed to do that? Or when you see a website that names names, that has actual pastors' names on it and names of churches and their logos and scores on them, you're like, oh, what is going on? Because we've become afraid to ask very simple questions. But I have a lot of questions, actually. And I'm sure you do too. But for whatever reason, we exist in this subculture of Christianity, regardless of the brand, by the way, whether it's Catholic or mainline or evangelical. We exist in this culture of shame and secrecy and silence. And that's something I want to dig into more and more as we keep going. So we're less than 2 weeks old. This campaign for this poster, I don't care, by the way, if you don't want to leave your house, but you really like the idea and you take the image of the poster and you Photoshop it onto an image of the church that you're thinking of. It's 2017, use technology. I don't care. That's not the point. The point is how much this message, this question, this posture towards the church needs to change. Because the church, the global church, is in many ways responsible for helping guide the moral compass of our country and of our world. And if you're paying attention, you're realizing that we've sort of lost our way. The church has actually been co-opted by some of the same structures and influence in the corporate world. And so this is perhaps an opportunity for normal people like you and me to raise our voices, and that maybe together, all of our voices can actually make a difference. So I hope you'll continue to engage. Thank you so much for all the support already. It's been overwhelming. Haven't slept much. Myself and the team, Tim and Sarah, we've been really trying to keep up with everything that's happening and adjust to the demand for additional clarity. So thank you again, and I hope you'll join us in making your mark on this 500-year anniversary of the Great Reformation. Take care. Peace.